everyone, and welcome to the very first public event for ScenoLab Australia. And so it's a real absolute pleasure for me to welcome you. So my name's Tessa Rickson. I'm the chair of ScenoLab, and I'm based up in Brisbane at the Queensland University of Technology, where I teach into the technical production degree and run our performance design minor up there. And so this has been a labor of love from a small team of people over the past year and a half, building on ideas and thoughts and etc. that have gone back well before then, in terms of looking at creating a hub, a community of practice, a center, a space, a group that would give Australians who work in the very broad sort of field of performance design a place to come together, to share, to talk, to catch up, to collaborate in whatever form that might be. And so I'm just going to begin today with a little bit of a brief overview about what ScenoLab is, what you could get out of it by joining us, how we relate to OISTAT, and I'll introduce a couple of the team from OISTAT we have here before I throw over to the wonderful Imogen Ross, who's coming today from NIDA, who's going to be kicking off this series of 3 talks we have over the next 3 Fridays, all starting at 12 o'clock Australian Eastern Standard Time, looking at Australian performance design, education, practice, and research. So ScenoLab, actually, so before I start any of that, let me please first acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we're all meeting from today. So for myself, that's the Yagara and Turrbal people of Brisbane. And I'd welcome you all to add and acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands that you're all joining from in the chat today, so we can sort of get a sense of where everyone's coming from. So in the spirit of reconciliation, ScenoLab Australia acknowledges the traditional custodians of the country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. We pay our respect to the elders, past, present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. We recognise sovereignty has never been ceded, always was, always will be Aboriginal land. So welcome today from wherever you might be joining, in Australia, beyond Australia, wherever it might be. And it's a real pleasure to welcome you here today. So ScenoLab Australia is new. We are a Australian-run organisation for Australian residents. And we are a national collaborative network for researchers, educators, and practitioners in performance design, architecture, interior and spatial design, and performance technologies. So ScenoLab brings together a growing body of Australians specialising in scenography and performance design, providing a space to share research and pedagogical educational advancements in all areas of design. So performance, set, spatial, costume, lighting, sound, projection, video, vision, whatever you will, through to intermediate design practice and digital scenography. We are happy to welcome all whose work intersects with concerns of scenography and performance design, be it questions of space, time, audience, technology, oral, visual, material, and environmental aspects of performance design. So we recognise that there are some incredible peak bodies already working in this space, and we want to work with those, and we have members in our advisory committee who are part of these bodies as well, so helping to advance our community, our industry through shared resources and expertise. So focus on performance design, education, and research. ScenoLab can complement existing organisations like the Guild and Australia's largest performance research network, which is ADSA, or the Australasian Association of Theatre, Drama and Performance Studies. So the aim of our organisation is to foster the exchange of knowledge and best practices in our field. Our vision is to create a vibrant and inclusive community of practitioners and scholars dedicated to advancing performance production, design and architecture in Australia. So this is us. The group came together under the guidance of an advisory committee with people from multiple institutions across the country, and also some of those partners from the Guild and other organisations as well. And that's also our current management committee there. So a little bit of sort of technicality. ScenoLab is set up as a incorporated association. Currently, we're based out of Queensland, and that just becomes is a legal thing at the moment. We're going through the process of registering with ASIC, to be able to technically, officially operate nationwide. We are, in other terms, a not-for-profit community organisation, and we're volunteer run. And so the way that the organisation works is that there is a management committee. Most of all those people who are now here on the Zoom session, and one of whom, Imogen, will be leading today's session. The management committee also comes up for re-election every so often at our annual general meeting, which if you become a member of ScenoLab, you can participate in, and you can also join us in that management committee. There's actually a couple of positions that are open at the moment, the deputy secretary role and the secretary position. And so you could actually come and join us and be a part of the organisation. And so if you are interested in learning more about that, I've got some links I'll share with you today. So some proposed activities. What do we want to do? We're a volunteer organisation, as you all are. We're very busy people, and so we wanted to start small. We wanted to start sustainably. We wanted to make it so that this thing wouldn't fizzle out too quickly, and kind of build on and start to sort of form connections. But some ideas of what we'd like to do is have curated talks like today's and on other topics that we think would be useful. And as I said on the bottom, we are welcome to proposals for activities and offers from everyone who might want to host something like a seminar like this. If you have an idea of something we should be talking about, you can get in contact with us and we can help you make that happen and connect you with the ScenoLab membership to make that work. So member meetings, we will need to have an annual AGM as part of the structure of the organisation, symposiums and conferences. So we actually, before we officially launched last year, we partnered with the Australasian Association of Theatre, Drama and Performance Studies. So again, Australia's sort of the Australasian sort of largest kind of body of researchers in this space, and held a working group at their annual conference. And lots of people were involved who are here today were involved in that. And so we're hoping that we can continue to kind of piggyback onto other organisations such as that, to keep the conversation going about performance design in Australia, and also looking into the future in terms of organising our own symposiums, our own chance to come together and to share what's happening. So networking, research, ideas sharing. We hope to get to a point where we can deliver a newsletter that can have updates from you, from members, you know, whether that might be job opportunities, whether that's opportunities for collaborations, for submissions, perhaps for education opportunities, workshops, research outcomes, etc. And then also publishing, research collaborations and opportunities. But really, we're a volunteer organisation, and we really hope to create and organise things that are meaningful and useful to the members. And so if you have an idea, send us an email and we can talk about it and get it onto the cards and help you make that happen. So obviously our first session is we're kicking off this series of talks. So today is the 21st. Next week, we're heading over to Perth over in WA for a session hosted by the WAPA team over there. And then on the 5th, up to Griffith University in Queensland, looking at performance design research, hosted by the Performance and Ecology Research Lab up there. Just briefly, ScenoLab and OISTAT. So OISTAT is the International Organisation of Scenographers, Theatre Architects and Technicians. ScenoLab is Australia's OISTAT Centre. We're not the first. Australia's had an OISTAT Centre before in the past. It's been a little while since that's happened, but we're looking to re-establish that connection. So OISTAT is a global network of centres, of individual members, of associate members, and now Australia, as that little arrow there shows with ScenoLab. And so by becoming a member of ScenoLab, it automatically makes you a member of OISTAT. And so you automatically join this global network of theatre researchers, educators, designers, architects, etc. And so it can give you access to updates about what's happening in the industry, calls for competitions, events, symposiums. But also importantly, it allows you to join in the smaller groups that operate within OISTAT, which are called commissions. So there's a whole variety of commissions there that are based around particular interests. And so you can join each of those commissions. Each commission has regular meetings, whether they might be in person, sometimes they offer tours or catch-ups or workshops, etc. We have some people here who are already really active members of the costume subcommission, the research commission. It's a way of extending your network and getting to know people around Australia, but also around the world as well. Oystat also, one of their programs is World Stage Design, which is happening next year in Sharjah in the UAE. And so by connecting with ScenoLab, connecting with Oystat, you can find out more information about World Stage Design. You can usually kind of be a little bit ahead of the curve in terms of when updates are coming out about those events. And through the subcommissions, you can contribute to those events as well. So there's lots there. When you register to sort of join the ScenoLab, I ask you to nominate what commissions you would be interested in. We'll take that and go back to the heads of those commissions, and they'll add you to their groups. So as of today, you'll start to get invited to Oystat commission activities. So keep an eye out for that. Please, I'll try to wrap up and throw back to Imogen now. You can join us through this QR code here, or you can also join us through the form there if I've got that right. Some of you have already done this, so you don't need to repeat it again. We're currently waiving membership fees for the first year, and we'll be looking at if/how we might have to structure membership fees going forward. We're hoping to use the support of universities to offset those membership fees. But at the moment, fees are waived, and of course, we'll give you plenty of notice if for some reason that does change going into next year. But for now, you can join us for free. You can get all of that access for free. So I will end that now and throw back over to you, Imogen, as soon as I can find my little button there. Thank you so much, everybody, and thank you for coming today. And so I'll hand over to Imogen now.
Thank you so much, Tessa, for that wonderful introduction, and welcome to everyone around Australia who has joined today's online seminar, the first of 3 Friday lunchtime sessions, where we are bringing together designers of all kinds, shapes, sizes, backgrounds, training, to talk about their practice and the nexus with education. Today's challenging start question was, how do design practitioners adapt their knowledge base and practice to become effective educators for the next generation? I have invited 4 superb designers and educators to join us. They have not only designed sets and costumes, exhibitions, operas, lighting and video content for some of Australia's most iconic productions, but they have also dedicated themselves to passing on their knowledge and skills to the next generation of theatre makers. Join us as we explore the different intersections of contemporary theatre design and education, and learn from their unique perspectives on the importance of mentorship, collaboration, practice-based research and creativity in the classroom. Before we start, I'd just like to say that I am speaking to you from the National Institute of Dramatic Art in Sydney. NIDA sits on the traditional lands of the Gadigal, Bidjigal, Darug and Dharawal peoples who lived, worked and played on these beautiful verdant lands between the Blue Mountains and the sea. Telling stories on these lands, creating things and passing on the knowledge to young people has happened here for tens of thousands of years, long, long before colonisation began. Sovereignty was never ceded, and this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. I would like to respectfully acknowledge all Aboriginal peoples who may be joining us here today, as well as all others who have joined us from their traditional lands. My name is Imogen Ross, and I am a live performance and event designer with a particular interest in the eco-creative and eco-scenographic spaces afforded by the intersection of expanded scenography with community storytelling. I have worked in the live performance space for over 30 years, and back in 2001, I co-wrote the book Performance Design in Australia, which connected over 45 designers across Australia and shared their creative processes. As well as being a designer and art teacher, I currently work at NIDA as their sustainability manager, and I curate the APDG Green Pages for the Australian Production Design Guild. I am a founding member of ScenoLab, woo, and I am delighted to be here to host their first ScenoLab conversation. So let's dive into that conversation. I would like to start off with our panelist, Joe Mercurio, who recently joined NIDA as the head of lighting, coming over from Verso in Thailand, where he has been teaching from 2021 to 23. Joe has always been interested in what goes unseen, the decision to show or obscure the positive and negative in that visual plane. Since graduating from the lighting course at the Western Australian Academy of Performing Arts, Joe has also worked as a production manager, tour manager, venue manager during a long career with Bangarra Dance Theatre, the Sue Healy Dance Company, Deck Chair Theatre, University of Western Australia, Performing Lines, and many more. He has given guest workshops and lectures at the Prague Quadrennial, Beijing International Biennale, the Madrid Escuela Universitaria de Artes, and spectacular. Joe, you'll have to correct me there. He has developed and taught lighting courses at the VCA and at the Hong Kong Academy of Performing Arts. In 2015, Joe was awarded the Faculty Teaching Award at VCA by the University of Melbourne. Joe divided his time between Australia, Hong Kong, Singapore, and Southern Europe since 2015, working both as an educator and as a lighting designer. I think he worked at the Western International School of Shanghai between 2017 and 2000, and he was in Thailand immediately before joining us here at NIDA in 2024. So Joe, I would like to ask my first question, which is to tease out the many pathways you have travelled, all of you, from baby designers to performance makers to becoming teachers at the tertiary level. How did you train to be a theatre, event and live performance designer?
How did I train? Lordy, lordy. Yes, Brian, I have been to all those places. You roll your eyes at me. Look, it's just been a journey of discovery. I guess if we rewind all the way to the back, being the youngest of four who were very involved in performing arts in the high school at John Curtin High School in Fremantle, which had one of the first performing arts schools within the high school. And wanting to catch up to my siblings, but being too young, and started by pulling the curtain open, and wanting, I think it was also easier for my mum to take us all to the same place at the same time. And then graduating from that to pushing a follow spot and doing certain other small tasks around the edges due to my age. And I just caught the bug. Fast forward, I ended up at Perth Technical College. I don't know if I graduated from WAPA. I graduated from Perth Tech just before it became WAPA. Oh no, I did graduate from WAPA later. Yeah, okay. I went to Perth Tech under Andy Siddle and learned a lot and did a lot of the foundational knowledge off of what had become bad youthful practice. But I was doing things, but not particularly in the best manner. From there, I started working my way up through the ranks, and I think that's a really important part of the industry. Is you start at the bottom, you work your way through it, you understand how it all comes together. From there, working with smaller companies into bigger companies, and getting a network of people in my peer group. And I think probably the big moment for me in that early period, having done a couple of larger shows, was meeting with the Page boys, with Stephen and David and Russell, and forming a personal relationship with them. And then being invited to do the lighting design for Nini, Praying Mantis Streaming in Oakers, and those three very early shows with the company, where we all kind of very much grew together as young artists and young men discovering how to be creative whilst doing other work. But I think that was kind of the launch pad for me with Praying Mantis Dreaming, then Ninny, and then Ochres as the kind of key growth steps way back. Lordy, I don't even want to think when.
No, thank you. That's actually a beautiful description of how you began. And I just had one little question to ask. Did you know then that you wanted to be a lighting designer after that experience, or was that still developing and growing?
No, I certainly knew by that point that light had always fascinated. Light, I loved light. I loved the idea of directing focus. I loved the idea of hiding and revealing from very early on. And maybe that was because I was a pretty bad follow spot operator, and often people weren't in light, and I go, "Oh, yeah, that's interesting," and it'd be like, "No, it's not. That's my job. Hit them with the light." So light had always been there for me, and I had gone through the process of lighting technician into designer, wanting to have that vision and control.
Yeah, thank you. I might stop your journey there because I think you have more to share with us a little bit later on in the panel. And I might throw to our second panelist, Christina Smith, to ask her how she trained as a designer. Christina is a set and costume designer for live performance living in Naarm with nearly 30 years experience. Christina has worked with many of the major performing arts companies in Australia, including Melbourne Theatre Company, Queensland Theatre, Victorian Opera, Black Swan, Malthouse, as well as New Zealand Opera and the Seattle Opera. And Christina is also the recipient of several Green Room Awards. Currently, Christina holds the position of Lecturer in Design for Live Performance at the Victorian College of the Arts and teaches primarily into the Bachelor of Design, of which she is the course coordinator of the Performance Design major. Christina, tell us a little bit about your training as a performance designer.
Thank you, Imogen. It's coming to you today from Boonwurrung country, which is South Bank campus on VCA. I trained at WAPA Represent, so WA Academy of Performing Arts, and it was right at the time actually when it had become WAPA or part of Edith Cowan University, though still not quite reaching the undergraduate degree that it was. So it was still in that liminal stage between being the TAFE and being the recognised university course that it is today. So I spent a really wonderful move to Perth to go to WAPA. I was so excited by the idea of an institution that had so many different areas to study. So the idea that they were associated with the conservatorium to do opera, dance school, incredible musical theatre program, and it really sort of drew me across the country actually to study there. And I had a great few years there, and then came over to Melbourne and was promptly became very anonymous, as you do sometimes, I think, when you come over from Perth and no one knows who you are. And so I did the second part of what I call my training. I call it the unofficial apprenticeship, where I spent a good 3 to 5 years making models for other designers, working for theatre companies, doing drafting, doing all sorts of assistant work, which actually at the time was both wonderful in that it paid my rent and kept me fed, but actually it was like an incredible training to assist all these incredible designers, be a part of their collaborations. I was often the silent party in the room, sort of squirreling away on models as there's conversations happening with really fabulous creative teams, actually. So I kind of see that actually it was almost an equal part of my training to what happened at WAPA. And I think an important part for me, acknowledging also the fact that coming out and graduating, wanting to be a set and costume designer, but also coming to a new city as a 22-year-old woman, that's a really hard thing to break into. Certainly, maybe a little harder back then. Hopefully not as hard now, but still.
I just have to ask a question, given your last
Mm.
statement, Christina. Did you find yourself pushed into costume more than set at that time?
Oh, well, certainly in my early jobs in the mainstream theatre companies, I've got a long relationship with Melbourne Theatre Company, but certainly my early commissions with them were as costume designer, and I call it trial by contemporary costume, where if you are a young female designer and often a graduate, they say, "Oh, we'll blood you on the contemporary costume show," somehow thinking that that's the easiest show to do, when actually the costume designers in the room will kind of shake their head knowingly and go, "Contemporary costume is so hard." It's so much work and it's so challenging. But yeah, absolutely. It was a pathway, though, I must say. And after a while of doing that, it's comical, but someone said, "Hey, don't you design sets?" And you go, "Yes, I do. Thank you."
I think there might be a few people in this audience today who might be smiling wryly and remembering their own journeys just there, Christina. Thank you. I'm going to jump now to our third panelist, Mick Rushi, because Mick works across stage, screen and video art. He is a pioneer of video design for theatre, designing shows for all of the major companies and festivals around Australia for over more than 30 years. There seems to be a theme for over 30 years amongst us all. He has produced projections on the Sydney Opera House for Vivid and created video designs for theatre, opera and dance around Australia, in London's West End, across Europe and Asia. His shows have won Helpman Awards, and he was awarded the Australia Council's Established Artists Fellowship for Interdisciplinary Practice in 2012. He has edited feature films, TVs, documentaries, and his video artworks are in collections and museums around the world. Commissioned works of Mick's include installations for the Opera House, Olympic Park, and the Biennale of Sydney. Mick is the new and inaugural head of video design at NIDA, and I want to ask him, how did you start your journey of training for video design in live performance, Mick? I imagine it was a slightly different trajectory to that of our other panelists.
Yeah, I suppose to a degree. I was born and grew up in Bundaberg in country Queensland with British parents who were very involved in theatre and the arts at a distance there in the Redneck Hills. I went to the Brisbane College of Advanced Education, as it was in 1981 when I started, to do diploma in creative arts, which was an excellent, very broad arts course. And I came out of that with a dance drama double major and was obsessed with dance and acting. But through that period, I supported myself by working and training as a carpenter and a builder. So I was very involved in practical building. And at the end of that course, I decided to travel to Sydney to study acting at the Ensemble Studios, which existed at that time as a method school run by a fellow called Hayes Gordon, who was an American method teacher from the Meisner School, and founded the Ensemble Theatre, which still exists. The school doesn't. And so I trained for 3 years there, acting, and as soon as they discovered that I was a builder, I was enlisted and paid to build sets for the theatre and for the school. So I supported myself throughout that practice, building sets for theatre and TV commercials and all kinds of building for video and theatre, or TV and theatre as it was, and feature films, props making and set building for feature films. And towards the end of that period, I was very involved in a lot of what was then termed multimedia arts, and very involved in the emerging field of electronic media arts. And I was also very involved in the peak era of dance parties with the recreational arts team, the RAT team, and the Hordern Pavilion and the showgrounds, and then on into Big Day Out and doing large-scale video production for concerts, parties, live events. And that certainly led to early video designs on large scale, using large scale projection and very early video wall technology. So I had this very practical path towards it, really. And then at the birth of digital nonlinear editing, after having trained as a tape-based editor, I dived in and purchased the third Avid suite in Australia and started running a business to pay for that, doing all forms of commercial, corporate, and television editing and production. So that made the 90s a very corporate period for me, doing TV commercials, all of the video production for Fashion Week from when it began. A lot of practical work, but I was still creating artworks and creating performance works, and I did a lot of work in the museum and historical framework too. The initial exhibitions at the Museum of Sydney, and a lot of work with the Historical Houses Trust as it was then. So at the end of the 1990s, the video technology was reaching a point where I often say video invaded the theatre, and I was perfectly placed to be part of that. And from the end of the 90s and through the first 10 years of this century, I was very involved in a burst of video production for opera, particularly. Many operas in that period from 2004 with Opera Australia and Opera Conference, and some very early groundbreaking theatre productions, Man with 5 Children for Sydney Theatre Company, the original production of Nick Enright's play, using the first large-scale media server rig in theatre. So as the first, but also still continuing to run a commercial business, and also editing feature films, a couple of feature films in that decade as well. So that kind of led me to a point, and in 2004, the then head of technical production at NIDA, the magical Bill Harris, invited me to prepare a course in projection and video for theatre, which is 20 years ago from today. And then this year, the new role of a head of video design was created, and I thought that would be a lovely way to wrap all of these things up.
What an extraordinary journey you just shared with us, Mick. That's a beautiful example of the journey that a designer takes from student, practitioner, to finally educator, or not finally. I mean, often I think many of us have been educating throughout our journey as practitioners, as we've learnt on the job. But thank you so much for sharing that. I see a theme emerging so far from the three of you about these unofficial apprenticeships and learning on the job, and this very practical skills-based learning outside of the academy that blends with what you've learnt, that sort of has actually made you the educators that you are today. Before we move on to the next question, I believe that our fourth panellist, Anna Cordingley, has joined us, and I'd like to welcome her and just tell you a little bit about her. Anna, I can actually say her full name, Anna Cordingley, ABDG, is an award-winning set and costume designer for theatre, opera, dance, musical theatre and cabaret. And her designs have been seen by audiences throughout Australia, Europe, Britain and the USA. She designs exhibitions and events and creates public art and installation. Anna won the Helpman Award for Best Set Design for Jasper Jones a few years ago and has won 2 Green Room Awards for Best Design. She received an Australian Production Design Guild nomination for the Best Set Design for her work on Jasper Jones and has been nominated for numerous Helpman Awards, Sydney Theatre Awards, and Green Room Awards. Anna is the recipient of the Christian Fredrickson Memorial Scholarship for Design and the John Vickery Scholarship. She's a design graduate of VCA, the Victorian College of the Arts. She has a Master's of Curatorship from the University of Melbourne and is currently undertaking a PhD at the University of Melbourne. Anna is the Associate Director of Learning and Teaching at the Victorian College of the Arts and the University of Melbourne, and is a visiting lecturer at the SRH Hochschule for Communication und Design in Berlin. Last but not least, Anna, would you mind sharing with us your early training and a quick précis of how that has brought you to talk to us today?
Of course, and thank you for admitting latecomers. Big apologies for that.
I think we were saying before, Anna, as designers and educators, everyone is actually juggling classes, end-of-term assessments, design deadlines. It's extraordinary that there are 37 people in the room.
Oh, yeah, it's beautiful. And I'm a fan of the fade in and fade out anyway, rather than sharp starts. But I started to, I think, identify as wanting to be a set designer at the age of 8 while sitting in a production of the Marriage of Figaro, because the set was so funny. And unpacking that little memory, as I've done a few times as a grown-up, I think I kind of mistook a wonderfulness for theatre with independence, because I was sitting on my own at the very front of the circle in the Playhouse at Melbourne's Arts Centre. And it was because the tickets were free and my dad was sitting down in the stalls, and he'd come up, he'd found the seat with me, and had spoken to the people sitting on either side saying, this is a bit weird, an 8-year-old is going to sit here on her own, can you look after her? And so I was alone in the world of theatre and watching this thing that was amazing, and I guess I wanted to stay there. So the idea of this is a professional, this is a space of empowerment, I don't know, it's all the same for me. So this was the love of theatre. My dad had been an opera singer, so we were doing quite a lot of free tickets and particularly opera. And at that point, there was the most fantastic summer season too in the Maya Music Bowl. So it was a really social space and possibly a kind of broader space. There was a big remit for audience for opera, at least in my memory. So there was no question, it was a no-brainer. And growing up in Melbourne, the VCA is where you went. I never entertained the idea of going anywhere else. And I came here straight from school at the age of 17, felt a little young at the time, but whatever, and tripped out, as you do, from the VCA with a network of collaborators and kind of co-creators, and started to make work. I mean, it kind of sounds ideal, but it is, apart from the fact that we lived on a smell of an oily rag, that is what we did. Someone would find money from Melbourne City Council and put on some little kind of indie wonderment in a basement somewhere, or it'd be looped into Midsummer Festival or Next Wave Festival or the Fringe Festival, or just because, and advertised on our own networks. And I could keep myself alive by working as a mechanist at Arts Centre Melbourne too. But I never considered myself a costume designer in the early days. It's not something it was all about set, and the mechanist stuff was all, in fact, all interactions I had with costume departments were as an art finisher. And scenic painting was also something that I kind of adored. So painting onto costume, distressing costume and breaking them down. But it was the expectation of the industry, I suppose, that you'd be able to do both. And so that part evolved.
And so that is actually very interesting. You've just sparked my own memory, Anna, that I was one of 3 female mechanists in the early 90s in Sydney. And I got a lot of work because we were busy ticking everyone else's boxes.
Yes. Yep, I was ticking boxes. I was a little bit weak, but I was enthusiastic. Yeah. Yeah. It was so important to understand how something goes together, to be able to construct and deconstruct and go, oh my gosh, well, this is a silly mechanism, isn't it? Why aren't we using this one? Or why did they make that choice? It's really important to know how things go together.
And it's so important to learn on the job. And again, what's coming through is that there was training in the tertiary institutions, but then there were years of learning on the job in a variety of jobs, with all of you wearing different hats and trying different things with different focus, which have all added to what you learn. I think it's important that students understand that the people educating them have actually been through this journey themselves. Sometimes it can be hard when you're sort of 19, 20 and looking at people in their 40s and 50s who seem to have this wealth of experience, that they too have gone on that journey that the students are about to embark on, and can, you know, and have so many layers of stories and experiences to share. Thank you. And I just also wanted to note that it wasn't a whopper stacked panel. I just need to say that. But interesting that three of the panelists and myself trained at Whopper. That wasn't intentional, but I think what it highlights is how students travel in Australia, and we travel interstate, often to get away from our parents or our ex-partners, but we also travel to get more experiences without having to go overseas. I think if we lived in the Northern Hemisphere, we might move to different countries to study, but here we often go interstate, which is the equivalent experience for us. And then we return to other states and share what we learned. So I think there's this beautiful cross-fertilization across Australia of people who've trained at the different institutions and then end up educating in different institutions, and that beautiful smorgasbord of knowledge and experience. Now, I wanted to jump to a more meaty question and invite our panelists to actually just jump in with their thoughts, sort of a group conversation. And I also would like to invite the audience, if you have a question or a response, please use the chat. And thanks, Tessa, she just popped that in. I saw that. So I wanted to ask our panelists, and I'll ask Christina to kick off, but I've combined two questions, which was, what has changed in the industry since you trained? And how are you now teaching your design craft to students? But I added a little piece of salt and pepper here. I wanted our panelists to name their top 3 innovations and challenges that they see facing contemporary theatre and live performance designers when they are teaching it. And I know that Christina would like to address this by looking first at the constant seesaw between balancing your own design practice with the teaching of design and the pedagogy.
Well, yes, Imogen, when you asked me about the challenges, I mean, it's the immediate one that came to mind is this wonderful thing that we all do. Well, wonderful, we'll debate that in a minute, but the keeping all the plates spinning in the air. And it's a really interesting thing, because certainly I feel it's very important for me as a teacher to maintain my practice. There's a very obvious relationship there in terms of my practice feeding what I'm teaching to students. But actually, I also think it's very important the other way, in that I find that my experience of teaching and my students and the way that they challenge me, the way that they sort of prod me to say, well, why do we do it that way? Why are we doing this process? It actually feeds back into my practice and into my design process. So I think it's a really, in the best times, it's an incredibly nourishing relationship. And then, of course, with the seesaw, and you go back the other way, and maybe even this week, we have Mark's due this afternoon at 5 p.m. There is, you know, it can be a very draining experience as well, trying to juggle being a practicing designer, and in my case, a set and costume designer, and maintaining my work here within the university, which very much needs to align with the academic calendar. Yeah, it's the thing that I love the most and struggle with the most.
Yes, because they don't talk to each other, do they? Those theatre companies and the academic.
Oh, wouldn't it be wouldn't it be grand? Wouldn't it be wonderful if actually, yes, we could all go and do our work in the non-teach week. I thought you were going to say, I thought you were going to talk about actually the structure within the university, and I was actually going to say, actually, the lovely thing at the moment about where I am just at the VCA is that we're all practicing designers, and so even my supervisors, Anna is actually, she's my supervisor at the moment for the next few days until Richard Roberts comes back. But because we're all designers, I've actually found that we all acknowledge it, and actually the idea of trying to maintain my practice, I'm well supported. As much as I can be. There's only so much that my colleagues here or that the VCA can do for me, but I've actually found that it's very widely acknowledged that I need to be doing this. And so, yeah.
So that's
we try.
that sense, Christina, of being encouraged to go deeper into your own continuing education and your own practice, and supported to do that. And I think most vocational arts schools and drama schools should really prioritise that their teachers' constant engagement and re-engagement with practice and what's happening in the industry, and support them studying further. And that's very exciting to see what you're doing with your masters, and what Anna is just about to launch back into her PhD, which it sounds frightening to me. Because this is a group chat, I just sort of wanted to throw this out to sort of Mick and Joe and Anna, also to sort of throw in what some of the most significant developmental trends are happening right now, and also responding to a question in the chat, how to future-proof what we're teaching, teaching towards the design future, which of course none of us can predict, but we can get a sense of.
Well, I'd also just touch on that professional practice issue, in that for me, I've always been invited to come and take courses and modules or mentor within institutions. And so this step to a permanent position is something new. And in the last few years, certainly once things kicked back up after COVID, I was just too busy working to be able to integrate. So I'm just starting to navigate that process. And I find, certainly at my stage of career and at my age, I don't really, surviving in the freelance world is always very taxing. And so putting all of my energy into an academic framework is a nice change for me. Anyway, that's just an observation of the difference between the freelance life and academia. In relation to future-proofing, or the biggest challenges or innovations that are going on, well, obviously there's a lot of discussion about artificial intelligence or large learning models, and there's a lot of change within the production industries because of those technologies. I feel that that is very similar to one of the great changes in my career, which happened at the end of the 80s and all through the 90s, which was the transition from analog technologies to digital technologies. So I like to be very focused on historical context for my students, and give them an understanding of why the current systems exist in the forms that they do, which is always because of what went before. And particularly in film video production, there are legacy technical issues that define the way that everything is discussed, and all of this legacy dialogue within technology and discussion. So I think it's very important to keep a focus on historical context and context of development of technologies, and not get too overly concerned with new technologies, because tool sets change and disrupt at various stages, and they have done throughout my career. So the only way to future-proof yourself is to keep learning.
Yes, and I think in the back of everyone's mind, probably as you're speaking there, Mick, is those two letters AI and the impact that it may have on us as designers and as educators, as it's sort of like moving very quickly into our world and into our practices. So I like the fact that you say that, just remember that these tool sets have come and changed everything in the past, you know, and they will again. And we just keep doing what we do. But moving forward, I think I'm just seeing a question from Brian to the whole panel, just sort of posing that question, why don't we teach production design as a whole, as a holistic study, as opposed to set costume, separate to lighting design and video? Or conversely, why wouldn't we teach set design separate from costume? And I think I can just throw a little thought into there, Brian, in answer, but I would like the panel to answer it. But based on my research, when I was researching the book all those years ago, Australia based its drama education on the English model, which kept set and costume together and lighting was separate. And they didn't even think about sound or video then. But in the United States, which started developing their practice a little bit separately, in the United States, I believe that costume is studied as a separate design form, and set and lighting and video are learnt together, because they see that they move together in so many tangible ways. But would anyone else from the panel like to have a go at answering that question?
I might jump in and say that I think we do actually, but it's probably like all good things born of the students, that they will answer a brief in a more holistic fashion, or they'll find an installation and might even go so far as to integrate light and sound too. So they are boundaryless in their submissions quite often. And we'd have, because the VCA has this advantage of having multiple disciplines here on campus, the kind of design and production is one, but there's dance school and there's musical theatre school. And so they are an art school, of course. There's the film and TV school. And in all of their engagements, they're having to kind of redetermine those boundaries or tear them down anyhow with every different work, with every different collaboration.
So what you're saying, Anna, is that you're seeing in the students coming through now that they are not defining themselves as rigidly as before. Is that
certainly true certainly in the studio practice, and perhaps when we are more formal, it's for our own kind of older pragmatic reasons, or there's a kind of, it's a simpler thing to manage if you send a costume drawing to the costume department to construct it. Although having said that, there has just been a really beautiful Merce Cunningham Breath of Life called The Ocean, staged here, whereby the costumes are incredibly sculptural and might be considered more like kind of movable live set pieces, actually. That is the students' work from post-Merce choreography through to costume and composition, actually.
I'm finding it very interesting in my current incarnation here at NIDA, having WAPA and VCA behind me, where it's a specialist course. You very much go into one stream or the other, where NIDA is doing a more broad course, and you will get chances to move around. This is not fully, but you do get to move around within some disciplines. Now that doesn't mean set costume and lighting audio, unfortunately, but just the pragmatic side of how you fit in the hours of making sure people are able to deliver on those ideas, with a limited amount of time to teach, instruct, and then have experience, just from that kind of practical timetabling side, because I've kind of run into that only in the job for 5 weeks, not a bit longer than that, 5 weeks or so. Just, you know, how tight the timetables can get and how much we want to put in there, to have competent, employable graduates who have accomplished what they need to, or what we think they need to. So it'd be a hard one on a 3-year course, maybe on a 4-year course. I think most Americans run a 4-year course with a foundation year, and then, so maybe on a 4-year course, something like that, Brian, is easier. And to the other point earlier, one of the things I found very different between when I first taught in whatever it was, 2005 at Whopper, to teaching now, is the democratization of a lot of technologies. So everyone can have a lighting desk or a video editing suite or a audio creation suite in their hands, and sometimes in their pocket. And that democratization across a lot of the disciplines has very much changed, A, what students come in knowing, B, what people are wanting or expecting to be taught, and then C, conversely, the democratization of that technology has also created a specialization. Gone are the days where you could walk up to a lighting desk or an audio desk and see a fader and fade it up, and you know something would happen. Now you've got to go through menus and understand all of these different computer software. So I think that's a really interesting challenge, the expectation of that democratization and specialization.
Yeah, I think that's interesting in terms of development. Once again, you know, I think within schools there are always legacy departments, and a lot of our language about what forms we teach is about legacies of specific departments within, which vary from institution to institution. I really like the way you phrase that, Joe, the democratization, because that is a particularly important outcome of, once again, the digital revolution, is the convergence of technologies with the ultimate multifunctional tool, which is the PC. And when we started, if you walked into a venue, everyone was on their dedicated piece of equipment. But now everyone's on a laptop, or even, you know, a tablet or whatever, as you were saying, and software is the thing that has blurred the edges. And also for me, particularly with the development of video over the last 20 years since I first started teaching at NIDA, at that time we were still in a crossover. We were pre the iPhone, we were pre-social media, and now we have students who've grown up post social media and post the multifunctional tools, and the being surrounded by screens of all sizes and shapes. So it's gone from wanting to use video as a tool to why wouldn't you, because it's everywhere. So the changes in culture, technology, and society mediate all of these things. Yeah, that doesn't really come to your question, Brian, but it's certainly something that we're seeing, I and Joe, as teaching into the technical theatre and stage management, as opposed to having a legacy design degree, which is split into set and costume. So yeah, it's
Can I have a go at Chris's question? Sorry.
Go
Mark.
for it.
I think what we need to teach in some ways has never changed. You know, the technology is sort of an element on top of that, but we need to have those core skills of craft and knowledge and understanding. We need to have that ability to communicate. We need to have that ability to see beyond the obvious. So I think in teaching emerging artists or practitioners, a lot of that is still having those core basic skills of well, the soft skills, and then of collaboration, communication, and creativity, and then the harder skills of some discipline specific. In the time that I've taught, there are people who have come in who don't necessarily want to be emerging artists. You know, they just want to be working within the industry. And then there's a lot of people who, to get them to be emerging artists, I think, like most of us have talked about, you graduate from your tertiary education, and then you enter a new education of apprenticeship, of on the tools, of learning your craft through practice. So I feel, whilst we've got shiny tools, and you know, we can 3D everything in Vectorworks and fly through it and all of that, we still need those core skills that haven't really changed over time.
Just because you can doesn't mean you should.
This is it's interesting where this conversation is going, because in a way it sort of leads into one of the questions that I was going to ask next, which is, how have the student body changed since your own experiences of being students? How has that changed, and what do you observe? And I know that in conversation before this meeting, Joe was raising some thoughts about what he had observed both here in Australia and in Thailand and Hong Kong in the student body, and how there's been, I just noticed on the chat that there is a couple of very pertinent points about, for students today, they are emerging into a very different landscape to which many of us did. You know, it's tough out there on a number of levels. And how do we address that as their teachers and as their mentors? I guess I will throw to you first, Joe, because I know that you did have something to say about student resilience. But then
Yeah,
I do invite everyone in the panel to sort of to throw their hat in the ring.
it's a kind of difficult and controversial area to dig into, but I do feel that the students I encountered back in 2005 at Whopper to the students I encountered just recently in my teaching practice have changed. They're very different people, I feel. And having come in and out, and having done like 4 years at Whopper and then back on the tools, and then 4 years at VCA and then back on the tools and blah, 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 coming in and out, I see the change rather than it happening slowly before me, not noticing it so much, I think. And it is about resilience. It is about able to do the harder tasks for longer times. I find people, students now, seem to want to take it a little bit easier, not have that resilience as much as maybe I've seen previously. And I've also encountered a lot more, and it might also be an awareness, it might be both sides of the conversation, around mental health and how much mental health and pastoral care needs to go into the profession of teaching than was my experience earlier on.
Students definitely come in with a more heightened sense of the need for support, and looking around, looking for mentorship and support, which I don't remember being such a big part of my training, but it was probably there. I just didn't access it. Perhaps I should have.
I'll let someone else say something.
Yeah, I was going to say, Christina and Anna, would you like to sort of weigh into this? Because you're sort of like balancing VCA and University of Melbourne down there, and sort of how student resilience sort of impacts on how you're teaching and what you're teaching, what has changed?
Oh, look at Anna and I being polite to each other. Yeah, it's been I think it's a really interesting notion, particularly I've certainly noticed here, maybe post-COVID, in terms of the idea of resilience. And also, I've just been looking in the chat here, but the acknowledgement that our students are actually under so many pressures. I'd like to bring that up from the chat as well. That idea that, you know, back when I studied, I was able to be at WAPA for 5 days a week. And I just don't think that's actually a feasible thing to ask a student nowadays. The fact that many of our students have significant employment outside of university hours, just to pay their rent, just to afford food. I think that idea of being able to, you know, commit to your art and be here all the time, it's just actually not feasible, I think. And I noticed that a lot. Even also getting students into the theatre to see the shows. The idea of students being able to afford theatre tickets. We've certainly been working with companies here to get, you know, incredibly reduced prices. For example, one of the major companies here has opened up their dress rehearsals for our students for a very paltry $5 sort of ticket allowance. But it's been such a major difference, I think, from when I studied and was able to. It's a different way, I think, of relating to the idea of the academy.
I wonder if the academy has shifted itself in line with this, or whether the academy is still operating a little bit behind these social changes. Sorry, Mick, over to you.
I was just going to pick up on Christina's point about the pressures, and I don't know, there will be definitely a relationship between these issues of resilience and mental health and the fact that the conditions for young people are so incredibly difficult in this current economic environment, particularly. So the stresses of actually surviving as a student are much worse. Certainly, you know, I'm of an age where university was free. There was, so, you know, the differences are just phenomenal. But even in the last 10 or 15 years, the pressures on of gentrification and all of the things that make it, my students, a lot of them travel an hour and a half to get to NIDA, just to get to from their parents' home, because they could never afford to live in a share house, as certainly I did all throughout my study and early life. So the conditions are very different, and they're very much more difficult and stressful. And I think that that's part of this, part of the difficulties and health issues that students demonstrate.
I think it's really important that we as educators are very aware of this, and as practitioners in the industry, because we have had the privilege, I guess, of riding through at a time when things were not so hard and establishing ourselves before then. So these are really good points. I think how we respond as we move forward, and things may get harder, not easier, over the next few years for our students and for the industry itself, is to sort of think about how would we adapt our practice and adapt what we teach to suit the climate, or do we kind of hold firm, going, we still need to teach what we know and what has always been taught, because that is the actual core skill, and the world will come and go with that. I don't know the answer, but I'm very conscious that, you know, we as designers and industry professionals can't change what's happening, but we can. What the things that we have agency to change is what we teach and how we teach, and the skills that we build within our students, you know, to do with resilience and preparation for what happens when they, you know, emerge out of the doors of the institution. I think I had in conversation with Anna the other day. Anna, you brought up something about questioning the metrics, and I think that was to do with the representation and the hierarchies in industry and institutions. And I think in an interesting way, this kind of blends into what we're talking about.
Yeah, I'm quite wary of didactic education, really. It doesn't seem to have a place, to my mind, especially not in an art school. So how can the academy be less like a traditional academy and instead guide and nurture and support voices to do their thing without anticipating the hierarchy or a kind of even an expertise? And the longer I'm here and teaching, the less like an expert I feel, and until it actually starts to sound, when you're reading off a bio or a list of kind of accomplishments, it starts to feel laughable because there's so much that I don't know. And the students are entering the space with so much that they do know that is really valuable. And how can we see that and support that, or let them see that as valuable, I guess. The metrics conversation was an interesting one because it was thrown at us recently. What would happen? What would happen if you just took the numbers away? If the feedback that you were giving at various intervals, and you know, and this is actually not revolutionary. This is happening all over the place. Experiments with this and instances of this, and it's happened in our for our MD courses over at the med school. They found
that's the Masters of Design, isn't it?
Oh no, not design. The doctors, the medical doctors. Yep. They negotiated with industry to remove the numerical score from grades because they recognised, and this was happening a little in some subjects before COVID, and then over COVID, an incredible act of negotiation because it was so. Their internships are thoroughly wedded to first steps out and into industry, if you call hospitals and unhealthy people industry. So it was definitely done in a kind of widespread consultation, but they recognised that students were gaming their assessments and hiding their flaws or what their perceived inadequacies and the areas that they needed most help with. So by removing the numbers, in fact, there would a greater relationship or a greater honesty or a capacity to help and improve, ultimately, a better outcome. And
so, Anna, just to clarify that, because we do have some participants here not from Australia. So just to clarify, you're talking about taking away from like the pass, credit, distinction, high distinction marks, and actually it becoming more like pass or fail. You either can.
It's very detailed feedback. I guess that is the clincher here. It doesn't remove. In fact, it makes that feedback more integral because that's what you have to go by. How is this person grappling with this task as outlined in this brief and according to these criteria?
Which makes it, you know how the hideous nature of assessments and marking in a creative field where there is a J-curve or a bell curve, I should say, and you need to kind of distribute your marks evenly along a bell curve. It sounds like what the doctors have been experimenting with is let's move away from that where it's actually about going right back to people, and each person is an individual and their feedback and the notes that we give them is specific to their journey. Have I understood that correctly?
Yeah, I mean, we do give incredibly detailed feedback, but I still suspect that often students might just glance at the number and then move along. And perhaps this would be a way were we to adopt this this approach for them to engage a little more thoroughly with that feedback, and acknowledging too that our feedback is a constant thing. It's the feedback feed forward. Intervening in their process at various points, so they're not just inheriting an opinion at the end is critical. Yeah.
And I can see in the chat just that Jeremy over at Edith Cowan says that numerical grades is transitioning back to feedback as well, which is very so interesting because it's about skills based, going back to first principles, I guess.
It kind of relates to that crossover between professional practice or the school of the practice in the commercial market, and academia. But I think sometimes for me, the mark is irrelevant, because really it's about the experiences that we can give our students, and not just in, you know, production season shows, as is the model so often, but object projects which allow students to actually get hands-on and do a whole lot of things, regardless of you know, the metrics and the outcomes. It's actually the doing that is important.
Yes, and I think Christina, you probably have a good point to comment on Mick's point there, because you have, and I saw in the chat that you mentioned something about this as well, coming from the Bachelor of Design at University of Melbourne as opposed to the Bachelor of Performance Design at VCA.
Oh, well, yes, I guess there's a it's actually even difficult for us sometimes within VCA to understand the difference. But my colleague Anna heads up design for, we have a BFA production, which is you know, training for students who I guess they kind of know they want to be in design or production, and it's, I think, training that allows students to enter an industry. You know, it's very much focused on ideas, but it's also focused on skills as well. The course that I teach into the Bachelor of Design is actually a larger and broader undergraduate degree at the University of Melbourne. And it's a sort of quite a different way of teaching design. It was sort of instigated by Richard Roberts around 5 years ago. And sort of a question that was put to him was, is there another way to teach design actually within Australia? Is there another way, opposed to the 3-year intensive studio and sort of practical training that we often do at various institutions like VCA, WAPA, or NIDA? And so we certainly do look at it. I'd answered Brian before in the chat, but we do approach it as a very holistic way to train scenography, in that all the students study, they all will study set, costume, sound, or lighting if they go through on the major, and they actually have to address all of those 4 areas in their capstone project. However, all of these areas are also available as what we'd call breadth subjects. So students from all over the university can actually drop in and study light in performance or sound in performance. And I'm actually kind of very excited by those ideas. That is one of the best students I've ever had in a subject called figure in performance. Her major was mathematics, but she actually studied the figure in performance or costume for the joy of it. And I often wonder, gosh, I wonder how that will feed her in whatever career she ends up taking. How will studying the poetics of light influence that architecture student who's actually taking light and performance? So it's a sort of a lovely cracking open, in a sense, of our discipline that is quite often through necessity. And Joe talked very clearly about the time, that big issue of time and how do we teach it all. So by necessity, what we teach is often quite cloistered. Students interview to go into the courses and they intensively study into the courses, but this option allows for maybe something that is a little bit more porous. So the appreciation of design. This being said, we can't, in Bachelor of Design, we do not do any production practice. We don't have time. So it's really about the ideas. It's actually not about that graduation and that vocational, I guess, goal in the graduation. That might not be why you asked me that question, though, Imogen.
No,
but it's taking you off on a tangent.
No, but that vague tangent, and it wasn't that tangential, in a way brings us to some of the comments in the chat about this balance between sort of academic, thoughtful, sort of more sort of less practical study, which opens it up and cracks the nut open, compared to vocational training, which prepares you for industry. And I did notice, I'd like to welcome Chris's comment, who's studying at QUT, one of the other wonderful places to study theatre and drama production. And I think, Chris, you asked, like this expectation that you won't learn enough, or people will consider that you don't know enough after your 3 years. And sorry, Charlie, that you still have to go and do a mentorship or an apprenticeship, and that it's often considered that you'll be volunteering your time in the industry to learn, which ties into our other main theme, which was affordability and capacity for students to balance work, life, and study. So I think I would like, in our last kind of 5 minutes of discussion, I'd like to sort of throw it open to our panelists, but also to the wonderful participants that we have here. And I want to thank everyone for these great questions that are flowing through the chat and being answered as we go. So that question is that in a way, we're coming back to this question of vocational, skills-based learning, practical. Is it preparing our students for the industry, or do they then have to go and do another 3 to 5 years? Or can they get work straight away? And how does that balance with actually going deeper into the study of design and the analysis of design and exploring it in the way that Christina was just talking?
Could I just jump in on that one, because I saw Charlie's question, and I had an experience yesterday with a third year who is lining up a whole series of excellent secondments, which is part of the third year degree here. And I was encouraging him to recognise that he could actually go and get jobs at theatres, rigging lights and doing production tasks, and support and actually get paid, because all of these secondments, of course, are fantastic exposure and opportunities, but there is that need to actually make money to live. And my personal experience was that I was able to make money by doing allied tasks, whether it be building or any kind of commercial production work. So often there is students aren't clear when they're pathed into either a vocational or an academic framework, that they can cross easily between those, and that the levels of vocational activity that they might undertake should be as broad as possible, but as a strategy for transitioning into a career where they can actually make money and survive, rather than this particular student felt that very challenged by the fact that he could not leave the institution and get a job as a video designer. And I said, well, that's not necessarily an expectation you should have, and you should think about it in broader terms, and also think about ways that you can support yourself within the industry that you're seeking to join. Anyway, that's just came to mind with that question.
Yeah, thanks, Mick. That's and that's very good advice, I think, for students, is to think broadly and tangentially as to how to earn money and earn their living once they graduate, and even before they graduate, if they can study. We've just only got a few more minutes before I'm going to hand back to Tessa to close this first seminar. Christina, Jo, Anna, is there anything else that you'd like to add in response to some of these cracking questions that we've got in chat, or something that has sprung to mind about that has come up in our conversation today?
Yeah, I'll have a go. Unfortunately, my battery's about to go flat, so I've had to turn the camera off and try to save power. I think in regards to Charlie's point about industry, I think any course you're doing, you should be looking to get professional influence in there, not just the academic influence. So I think even my daughter, who's studying something very different in a university, you know, she's looking forward to doing placement internships and work in industry to buffer or support or augment what she's learning at the academic level. I think there is a reality in that our courses are written or structured or set up in, you know, 2020 to get through academic board, and we're delivering them in 2024-25, and things are moving very quickly. So whilst our underpinning knowledge and our foundational help is very important, at all times, I think as an educator, I am constantly trying to send my learners out into industry and come back and challenge what they're learning. And whether we're behind the times or we're teaching academically rather than practically, or we emphasize safety more than you do out on whatever it is, that they're bringing both, or they're getting both the academic side and the practical industry relevant information at the same time.
Yes, I really like how your phrase there, Joe, about they need to challenge what they are learning when they come back in. I think that's so important for our students to continue to challenge us as we challenged our teachers, and to say, why are we not up to the minute? And your point there that curriculums are often finalized and written a couple of years after they began being thought about. So there's this constant catch up that we need to play. Christina or Anna, any final thoughts before I hand back to Tessa?
Oh, only that there's like ideally, there'd be something of a bell in your own kind of professional career in regards to unpaid work, and that there's a return, I think, to the unpaid work, to the kind of gifted work or the support or something of companies that don't necessarily have the finances or have altruistic, I don't know, but I think that the brunt can't be carried by those who are emerging, whatever that means, for the chat, or the recent graduates or the soon-to-be graduates. And for those folk in the room to be very clear when you're doing something for course credits, so when you've arranged an internship, and it really has to be formal, and when you are behaving as and working as a volunteer and covered as such via the institution you're helping or whoever is auspicing that institution, so that your insurances are covered, so that that is clear, and you're caring for just how much of that is in your life, caring for yourself and trying to find that balance, because it is not sustainable to do that endlessly, nor should it be, and nor should it be a requirement.
Thank you, Anna. And I remember one of the words that Christina used earlier, which was about the importance of nourishing environments for study and for creation. And I think that's sort of a very fitting way to sort of round off what you were saying, is that we need to think of that balance and nourish our students and nourish ourselves as practitioners as we move forward. I'm conscious that there are a whole lot of stresses upon us as educators and industry professionals. We've run out of time. I just wanted to say thank you so much to our panel for your insightful and honest contributions today. It's been a fantastic preliminary discussion about the intersection of theatre design and education. There's so much more to talk about, and luckily ScenoLab is wanting to talk about this stuff and open this up and have more in-depth conversations. It's been a bit of a smorgasbord today, but I really look forward to being involved in many more ScenoLab conversations with you and many more as we move forward. Over to you, Tessa, to do the wrap up.
Thank you so much, Imogen, and thank you so much to Anna, to Joe, to Mick and Christina for today. It was it's a lot of ideas, and I just thank you so much for sharing your perspectives, and thank you to everyone in the chat as well. So much came through there, and I want to, as Imogen sort of hinted at there, acknowledge that there's no way we could consider all of these different approaches, these different thoughts, opinions, factors, etc., even within one institution, let alone the dozen or so that are represented by the people who are attending this session today. And so, you know, as ScenoLab, we want to kickstart the conversation. We want to get it going. We want to sort of help support to keep it going, and know that only through more continued discussion can we really kind of begin to, you know, tease out the nuance and get lots of different perspectives and hear from different people who are going through different circumstances across different types of education, different educational institutions, different states, different design areas, so much variety there. And so I've just reshared a link to the registration form for the next 2 sessions, where I think, you know, we've based these sessions around these 3 pillars of education, practice, and research, but recognizing that no one rarely sits within one. We operate in this grey space between all of them. And so all of our ideas and our discussion will inevitably kind of merge and meld over the next 3 Fridays. And so we hope that you can join us for those. If you can't, let me know. We'll record the sessions and make them available afterwards. And as before, head to the website, check it out, register to join us, to stay in the loop. It's free. If you have ideas about things you want to talk about, or things you want us to discuss or focus on, we're so welcome to them. And we'd love to sort of use this tiny burgeoning organization to help support us as a community in our conversations and the incredible variety of perspectives that we have here. So thank you so much for spending your Friday late morning / lunchtime with us. I hope to share the chat as well, the text that's going on in the chat somewhere after this as well. And so, because there's so much there, so much richness. And so thank you so much to everybody. And hopefully we will see you next Friday for our session being hosted by Whopper, by Brian, by Jason, by Jeremy, and also featuring, I've just lost her. She's Fiona in the session as well. And so, yeah, we really look forward to it. Have a lovely and safe and restorative weekend. And it's been an absolute pleasure. And so thank you so much, everybody. Goodbye.